Father Michael Holleran, Catholic priest, who spent a good many years at a silent monastery in Europe and in the United States. So welcome, Father. It's nice to have you here.
Delighted to be here. Thank you very much.
And we're going to talk about you today.
Oh, well, I hope you're not bored out of your mind.
We'll find out.
Yes.
So if we hear any snoring, we'll sort of pick up the pace or something.
Right.
So I know a little bit about you, but like, tell me some more. Do you want?
Sure. I can,
just tell me some more.
Sure, I can just. I was actually born in Denver, but I moved. I was the eldest child of what turned out to be 8 children from my parents, who met at Catholic University. He was from Pennsylvania and she was from Missouri, so I owe my existence to Catholic education. But anyway, he got his career job at St. John's University as a chemistry professor when I was 1 year old. So he moved to Brooklyn and eventually to Valley Stream. Yeah, Brooklyn, yes, Bay Ridge. And then to Valley Stream 2 years later, and that's where I grew up. Went to Catholic grammar school and then was fortunate enough to win a scholarship to Regis High School, the Jesuit high school on the Upper East Side. So I commuted in every day, and that was a wonderful experience because it was in the 60s, the late 60s, when the Vatican Council was just happening, mid to late 60s, and then all the social ferment of that time. It was a very exhilarating and challenging time for the church and society. So I was really into it. They gave a very humanistic and religious education. Jesuits do. So by the time I finished my high school, I was ready to. I entered the Jesuits, wanting to devote my life to God in that way, and spent 2 years in the novitiate up on the banks of the Hudson River, which is now the CIA, Culinary Institute.
Oh.
Okay.
I was like, what?
You know, the Jesuits are a secret society, but not like that. Yes. And then went to Fordham as a Jesuit and did my undergrad, majoring in classical languages, which were my great love, Latin and Greek, and philosophy, which all young Jesuits major in anyway. But I also discovered early in my Jesuit novitiate something that we've talked about, the two of us on the program, the life of prayer. You know, beyond what I was trained in, you know, the usual vocal prayers and liturgical prayer, important as they are, I was trained in meditation and Ignatian meditation and contemplation. And when I discovered the inner life, I felt strongly drawn to a life of solitude and silence with God. So
you know, I want to ask you what drove you?
Right.
What drove you into priesthood?
Yes,
Yeah, exactly. What drove you to the priesthood?
Well, that's a good question. I felt a call, having read the biography of the person who is now the patron of priests in the Roman Catholic Church, the Curé d'Ars in the 19th century, Jean-Marie Vianney. And I felt from that time on, 13 or so, the age of 13, a call, and I considered it during high school. So even before I felt drawn to the Jesuits, I felt drawn to the priesthood. It's a good point. I was, yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you're comfortable talking about this, but I mean, what was it that drew you? I mean, is it the lifestyle? Was it? Do you have?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, looking back, I felt it was the life of dedication to God. Yes, and closeness to God and serving God. That took social action kind of coloring through the Jesuits, but then through the Jesuits themselves, a strong call through the life of prayer that I was taught by them. A strong call to dedicate myself entirely to in inner life of prayer and silence and solitude. Another type of radical consecration to God that I just felt very drawn to. And I was only 20, 21 at the time.
Right.
So when I made my first retreat up in the New American Carthusian House in Vermont, they said, well, finish college and wait a year. So I did that, and I entered the Carthusian monastery in Vermont, the American House, right after college, that summer.
And why do you think they said that to you? Why did they say, "Oh, finish college first"?
Well, you have to have your human foundation, your good
And
base.
that's why they sort of
and also psychological maturity. I mean, to grow, they could see I needed to grow in certain ways, become more comfortable, you know, with just in my body, in life, you know, more integrated. And that did occur during that final year, to some extent. So I was happy then to enter. And I was the first novice, the first American entering in the United States, instead of being sent to France, ever. So that was in 1972. So I spent the next 12 years in Vermont, going through my monastic formation and my studies for the priesthood. I was ordained a priest in Vermont, in the parish down the mountain, in 1979. And professed as a monk a year and a half before that. But since I was the first monk formed in the Western Hemisphere, and ordained in the Western Hemisphere, they had a big Catholic, in the Catholic news service, a big photo of my being ordained, the first Carthusian ordained in the Western Hemisphere. You know? It was kind of funny. But since I was the first one, they said, "Oh, he's got too many rough edges. We better send him back to Europe and you know, finishing school in Europe." So I was sent to the Mother House, La Grande Chartreuse, which was founded by Saint Bruno, our founder.
Is that the one that appears in the movie?
Yes, Integrate Silence,
Silence,
which was done some years after I had left France. But I knew the people there. And so much so that I was asked by the Film Forum, where the movie was shown here in New York, supposedly for 2 weeks, turned out to be 8 weeks, because New Yorkers flocked to it. Almost 3 hours of silence. They were attracted. Why not? But I did the commentary about 5 times.
That was a good film, though.
I did the Q&A at the theater a number of times, and I very much enjoyed that. But that was where I lived, yes. So you can see where I lived, the Grande Chartreuse, in that film, which is readily available. Integrate Silence. And this is an interesting point, perhaps, well, in a sense, from one perspective, the most fascinating element in my biography, my CV. I was in charge of the liqueur.
Really?
And the famous
and
Chartreuse.
You didn't bring a sample?
Well, who knows what I got. But,
what is in that big bag?
Chartreuse, by the way, the color chartreuse is named after the liqueur. It's a very distinctive greenish-yellow color. And it's the only liqueur, if I'm doing a little publicity here, the only liqueur that's naturally colored. That's why it's so potent. It's 55% alcohol, 110 proof.
Really?
Because it's colored by natural, you know, chlorophyll, by the natural plant coloring. And if it were lower in alcohol, it would disintegrate.
So what's it made of?
130 herbs, which I'm not going to tell you.
Oh, they're secret.
Yeah, yes, right.
You and Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Right, right. There are like, I don't know, 5 living people who know the formula, so I'm one of them.
You're one of them?
Yes. Right.
Wow.
But that was a great job. I had that for 4.5 years in France, you know, quality control and all of that.
And that was like, as you're going about your silent day, that was your sort of your job,
well,
your
that's
responsibility.
a good way, yes. Lived the full Carthusian life. But unlike most monks, you know, I had this responsibility on the outside, so I learned to drive in France for this. You know, I had never learned to drive.
A good New Yorker doesn't know how to drive.
Right. So I was, you know, I would have to go out. The distillery was about 15 miles away, so I would take trips there once or twice a week. And they actually computerized the whole system while I was there. So that was interesting. But anyway, that was a very good job. But the time came when they realized they needed to rejuvenate the English house called Parkminster. And so they sent the novice master at the Grande Chartreuse, who was Irish himself, and a couple of us to England, where the youngest monk was about 65.
About the same age as you are now.
Now.
He was so old.
I was 40 then. I was 40, 41.
It's all relative, isn't it?
So that was, and I was the procurator there, who was in charge of, you know, the work around the house, the brothers who were doing the work, and the external ordering. So I still had a contact with the outside, and I think that's kind of the key to what happened after that. I found my best balance when I attempted to lead a deep life of prayer, but also had some contact with world outside.
Mm-hmm.
So in the end, that's what I'm hopefully still doing. In other words, I felt that type of extreme separation from the world was not serving, for me, not serving the purpose anymore, either of spiritual or of psychological growth.
And what do you mean by that? When you say it wasn't serving?
Well, I
mean,
just felt that I needed the stimulation and the challenge of the outside. For example, I knew that I wanted to explore, I felt more and more called to explore psychology and even more so Eastern types of meditation.
Mm-hmm.
I've often said that we, in the West, we've kind of lost the teaching thread, the contemplative thread of our own tradition. And I think I tried to recover that, through the Jesuits and the Carthusians, the religious life, the special intense concentration on that, intense focus on that. But I just felt that I was called to explore others. Even back in college, as a Jesuit at Fordham, I studied Eastern religions and Eastern meditations. So it was an abiding interest, and now it became more pressing. I felt for me to explore that. So I did. In 1994, I left the monastery in England and came back to New York, and quickly got a job at a parish in Greenwich Village, actually. And everybody said, "What is it like passing from the silent monastery to Greenwich Village in Manhattan?" And I said, "Well, they both are at the frontiers of the human spirit. So, pretty much the same in some sense."
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I experienced it. So it was a very good parish, very open. There was an openness to the gay community there, and a strong sense of intellectual exploration. They had a series of conferences called the Millennium Series, when cardinals and theologians were invited to speak in the parish. So it was a very, very dynamic place and a very good place for me. That's also when I began studying with my old professor from Fordham, Jesuit Father Robert Kennedy, who's still around with us, and who's now a Jesuit Roshi, a Zen Roshi.
Just like.
Well, I began studying with him, working with his group, sitting with his first, what we call Dharma successor, Janet Abels, at the Still Mind Zendo, which is still in existence in Chelsea. And later I studied more intensely and directly with Father Kennedy, so that so I had a Zen practice from 1994, then for 15 years, and in 2009 became a sensei, teacher, formally recognized through Father Kennedy in the Zen tradition. And the very same year, I was finally formally accepted, canonically accepted, as a priest of the Archdiocese of New York by Cardinal Egan, just as he was retiring. And up to then I had been technically still a Carthusian, even though I was living outside. But for the last 5 years, I've been teaching as a sensei and also functioning as a priest of the Archdiocese of New York, even though I've been 20 years now in Catholic parishes in the Bronx and in Manhattan. Not all that time at St. Joseph's in the Village, but that's a. In fact, in 2009, I was invited by Cardinal Egan to live with him in his retirement place on 33rd Street, which is a very fascinating, time, getting to know him and the church in that way. But that's also where I founded my first Zen group and centering prayer group, which we've talked about. Had a centering prayer group there. So I do teaching in various zendos. I have my own zendo, that is to say Zen Meditation group, Sangha, at St. Francis of Assisi parish right by Penn Station, a very well-known Franciscan parish. I've been there for a year or two now. And teach in various zendos around. I give workshops and retreats on centering prayer and meditation and various Eastern traditions, because I also spent 8 years studying with a Hindu master, doing yoga type meditations, which was very important for me. I studied the Kabbalah, although not directly with a Jewish master. I was introduced to that through Master Choa Koksui of the Pranic Healing Center, who was my yoga teacher, as I say. So I've had exposure to other traditions as well. So I'm certified to teach in 2 traditions, the Catholic and the Zen Buddhist, but also
you have experience in
a lot of experience of other things. So
Yeah.
I do a lot of interfaith work internationally. through the Global Peace Initiative of Women, particularly, with the contemplative arm, the Contemplative Alliance, and the Shinyo-en. I'm on the interfaith advisory board of them, which is a Japanese Shingon Buddhist group, very open to interfaith dialogue. We call it interspiritual work, not on the level of faith discussion, a concept discussion, but as you would expect from my background, on the level of religious experience, interspiritual dialogue, so sharing spiritual experience. And I've been to Japan and Bhutan, and I've been very interesting places with them. So I'm very thrilled to have all these outlets. And I've never looked back on the monastery in the sense of I shouldn't have left, but I've never looked back saying I shouldn't have entered.
Right. I have a question about that. What was it like to spend so many years in more or less silence? I mean, what was that like? I mean,
well, it's very hard to describe. First of all, you have to have a calling to it, which I certainly believe I did. Many times people come and they climb the walls after 3 hours. But since I had a call, I never felt lonely or not even really scared. You know, a few times it was, I mean, a number of times it was difficult, you know, various, you know, crises to overcome, you know, stages to go through, you know, in your own inner journey, or outer journey for that matter. But it was basically wonderful, you know. It wasn't traumatic or anything like that. But I did reach a point where I knew I had to leave, and once I made that decision, it was easy to do it.
Then you felt right.
Yeah.
Felt right. And so then let's jump back to the Zen, that sort of combination of Zen and also the yoga tradition, and then the Catholicism.
Yes.
Like how do you feel like that blends? I mean, how does that? Is there
It blends on the level of individual experience. You know, I kind of like the idea of the finger pointing to the moon. You know, there are various paths, and you can argue about which one might be higher from what particular standpoint, and maybe some are. You know, Catholics often say, you know, Christians often say that it's all through Jesus. Well, it is all through Jesus, but you can approach even Jesus through different ways.
And you feel like Buddhism is a path to Jesus?
Well, Buddhism is a path to reality, and at the head of reality is Jesus, so yes. Yes.
Yeah.
But the whole point is even in Catholicism, you're getting beyond the word.
Right.
You know, we have Jesus' prayer and the name of Jesus, which is very precious, like mantras or words or names in other traditions too. But even in Christianity, you have to go to meet Christ, you have to go beyond the word. That's what contemplation is. You're always going beyond even the holiest words to get to the reality, which is always beyond words. Even a stone's reality is beyond words. How much more God's reality or Jesus' reality? So really, all of these paths are precious. I like to compare them to like a banquet. Some people may say, well, why do you need this if you already have that? Why do you need Zen if you already have Catholicism? I say, well, it's like saying, why do you need potatoes when you already have steak? Or why do you need asparagus when you have salad? Well, where's the problem? It's all one wonderful banquet, and it goes into the same stomach, and it all nourishes the same person, and reveals, you know, various strands of the multifarious beauty and wisdom of God.
So you believe that all these different traditions are really just leading all to the same place?
Well, ultimately, I mean, they have each method, each perspective, each wisdom tradition has to be fully respected for its own integrity and its own completeness. I'm not a syncretist in the sense where you just, let's take this and then throw it together in the old way. That's not correct. But if you do respect each one, you might achieve what my friend, the international interfaith theologian Paul Knitter calls double belonging or triple belonging, where you can actually belong in a real sense to more than one tradition. And I like the way he defines it. You find your basic rooting and your basic formation, your basic identity in one tradition, but from there you also find, as he says, substantial nourishment from another or other traditions. And that doesn't provoke any conflict. It shouldn't. It doesn't in me.
I guess
it needn't.
Yeah. I guess my question is, how do you feel about Buddha? I mean,
he's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, like
all of these, you know, sometimes there's a tendency, especially in evangelical Christianity, to speak about these as demonic. They're not at all. I mean, they're great wisdom figures who can bring a lot of peace and inspiration, to people of all time. And I think they all work together up in the heavenly sphere, is what I think, what I experience.
Yeah.
Demonic things are violence and hatred and fear and all of that.
For me personally, I have this idea that like all the religions are saying a lot of the same stuff. Don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal, don't
The basic
kill,
moral rules, yes.
It's all the same. At one point, I'd gone to a Buddhist thing, and I didn't speak the language, and I said, I didn't need to hear anyway, because I know what they're going to say. They're going to say, don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal, And I said this to a Christian friend, and he was horrified. He was like, how could you say that? And I'm like, well, I think it's kind of true.
Well, the moral perspectives are certainly very similar, and even identical in some ways, like the don't kill, don't cheat, don't steal. I mean, that's right from the Ten Commandments and right from the Buddha's precepts, Buddhism's precepts. They're not the same in the sense, as I just said, each one has a particular path, a particular wisdom road to offer, but they're all leading, I think, ultimately to the same.
Can you give me some points about that, like the difference between how Buddhism is different than Christianity? Can you give me a few points on that?
Well, for example, they don't talk about God at all. Some people say, oh, that means Buddhism is atheistic or impersonal. Well, no, it just means they don't want to talk about it. And we could use a little bit of a dose of that, more in the West. More of a focus on the deconstruction of the ego, which we could also use more of in the West. That's interesting. That's why one of Paul Nitter's best books, is called "Without Buddha, I Could Not Be Christian." In other words, there are certain foci, certain emphases in Buddhism or in other traditions that can help us not only to supplement but to recover lost elements like contemplation in our own Western Christian tradition.
Right.
So that's where also the different traditions can collaborate to bring a fuller picture and to open up doors in our own tradition that we might never have found otherwise.
Right. So in the previous half hour, we had talked about centering prayer, and how centering prayer can sort of bring you back to your center and which is God.
Yes.
And to make that connection, and then that whole thing about the centering prayer not being that widely publicized,
yes,
that introduced in
lost
so many communities. Yeah, but where kind of what you're saying is like with the Buddhism and sort of the meditation practices that they introduce, they don't talk about God, but it does bring you back to maybe that same spot.
Brings you to a centering, brings you to an inner truth, it brings you to an experienced reality. And you can call it what you want, but better don't call it anything. Or if you prefer, you can recognize how it's compatible with what other people have called it, or what they sometimes call it in Buddhism too, Buddha nature or whatever you want to call it. So it's a wonderful openness of spirit. If your spiritual experience doesn't lead you to openness of heart and mind and freedom, then you're going in the wrong direction, no matter what tradition you're in.
You say that again?
Yeah, if your spiritual practice doesn't open your mind and heart and expand them in love and compassion, and if it doesn't lead to freedom, that inner sense of spaciousness, then something's wrong, psychologically or spiritually or socially or whatever.
That's very nice. I like that a lot. At one point, I had been on retreat for a number of months, and I had sort of decided that, if whatever your practice you're doing is making you bitter or angry or mad or whatever it is, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
And it should lead to these things of openness and spaciousness.
I mean, none of the world wisdom traditions that we have leads to a space like that. But individuals practicing any of them can lead to that because they're not doing it right, or they're not doing all their soul work, which we also spoke about before, all the necessary work to harmonize and purify all the stuff, the gunk that's down there.
Yeah. That's really great. I mean, you have a really very interesting story, if you don't mind me calling it that.
Yes,
a very interesting life.
People always say that I should write a book, but
I think you should, too.
I tend to do better with this kind of personal face-to-face exchange, preaching and teaching live.
Yeah.
So I can at least spread the word that way.
Yeah, you do have a really great story, and it would be interesting to read. but maybe you're not inclined that way. That's okay.
Eventually, if I'm inspired, hopefully I'm
Yeah.
in touch enough with the Spirit, hopefully,
Yeah.
that I can answer that call.
Or as you have enough of these conversations, like
Yes.
certain topics will come up and it will inspire you to write something. And
Yes.
you don't have to think of it as writing one whole thing. You just write it as like little parts of it and then string it together later.
But each one of us does have a journey that's unique, and we have to expect surprises in our lives. You know, if we don't have a huge change of mind and heart, maybe a huge external change somewhere in our lives, then maybe we're not following the Spirit. You know, 'cause it's an infinite journey toward an infinite goal. How could it not be full of surprises, joyful ones and challenging ones?
Yes, indeed. And so tell me, where can people find you?
Where am I?
Yeah,
Yes,
where are you?
um,
Where are you? Besides right here in the studio.
So we're always right here, as the Zen says. So where else can we be?
Here now.
Or if we are here. Anyway, yes, you can find me on my website, which is www.michaelkholleran, my name, .org. The K stands for Kevin. That's my baptismal name, Michael Kevin, but it also stands for Koryu, which is my Dharma name, which means dragon of light. So I like to use the K in both traditions. michaelkholleran.org.
Great, very good. So I want to thank you very much for being here today, and
Great
it's
pleasure.
it's really been great.
Thank you for listening. You know. hope it exhilarates some people's search.
I hope so too. I mean, I know it has mine, and I feel like it's sort of bringing different pieces of myself together. So it's been really lovely.
Yes, to bring it all together, and that's what it's for.
That's right. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.